Right, thanks everybody. As I said, I'm not going to make a long speech. We know why we're here today. From May the 8th, we were faced with a long and looked like being a very drab battle of the bland leadership election. And then this man entered the race to a lot of our great wishes. And we've managed to secure him to come to Coventry today. I know he had a fantastic day in the northwest yesterday. He's off to Birmingham later today, so I'm not going to waste any of your time listening to me, because you haven't come to do that. You've come to listen to the man we hope will be the new leader of the Labour Party, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you all for giving up a Sunday afternoon to come into this hall. If we could have body heat powered air conditioning, it would work well this afternoon. But there's a technology question for somebody. Who can solve it? I'm sorry we're a bit late coming. We were at a big rally in Liverpool last night where we had 1,500 people packed into a hall that was supposed to be for 800, so you get the feeling. Unfortunately Sunday services aren't what they might be, so we've had a bit of a complicated journey, but we've got here now, so I'm sorry to have kept you all waiting. The campaign is fascinating and going extremely well, and I want to say a big thank you to all those people that have done so much to bring about a very good grassroots organisation across the whole country. 5 weeks ago we managed to get on the ballot paper with enormous difficulty, and I do pay a very genuine thank you message to all those Labour MPs that nominated, about half of whom didn't really agree with what I was saying at the time. Have since gone into deeper disagreement with me, but I see a turning of the tide, and the deeper disagreement has now become a lesser disagreement, indeed a shallower disagreement, and in fact I think within about a couple of weeks there might be no disagreement at all. That's politics for you. But I also want to say, very importantly, a big thank you to all those people that recognised the need for a serious debate in the Labour Party after the election defeat in May, and wanted there to be a proper policy discussion. I agreed with them. That was the view I put at the Parliamentary Labour Party. It's the view that many of us put. We weren't to get that opportunity. Instead, we're into a very lengthy leadership contest, which is, in effect, that debate. And those people that got on Facebook and Twitter and email and encouraged Labour MPs to nominate had a huge effect. And so this campaign is not about an individual, it is about all of us. It is about all of us wanting a Labour Party and a Labour movement that doesn't just represent their hopes, their aspirations and their ideas of the kind of society they want to live in, but also is a vibrant day-to-day campaigning organisation that does try and defend working class communities against the attacks they're under from this government, that is part of that general movement of people who really seriously think the world could be run in a much better way, and that this country doesn't have to descend into a yawning chasm between the richest and the poorest. Instead, we can make a real march towards equality. That is what this campaign is about. And I say a big thank you to all those that managed to kickstart it and get it into operation. In 5 weeks, we have grown from a zero campaign into one where we've just signed up the 6,000th volunteer to help in this campaign. We've got people working in every part of the country, and we've now done 21 hustings, and this, by my calculation, is the 42nd public meeting we've done during 5 weeks. And they're all enormous, and they're all people with amazing knowledge, ideas and ability. And in my view, is very strongly two things. One is that each of these meetings should include a good time for people to express their point of view, express their ideas and their hopes. And secondly, that whatever the result on September the 12th, that this isn't either the end of the story or the end of the chapter. It's a staging post in a much longer process where there is a real open and democratic debate about the kind of economic policy we follow, the environmental policy we follow, the international policy we follow, the kind of country that we want to live in, and the way we want the party to do that. Because I am fed up with the way in which democratic decision-making in our labour movement has been so reduced ever since the early 1990s. I want our party back. I want the democracy of our party back. I want the right of business representative. And you'll forgive me if in honour of our great friend and mentor Tony Benn, I take a sip of tea as we're speaking at this meeting. There is a challenge, and the challenge really is about the economic strategy that's being followed by this country, the economic strategy that we follow as a party. 2008-9, the banking crisis was real, dangerous and desperate. It was brought about by lack of banking regulation, by greed, by over-profit taking, by a subprime mortgage crisis in the USA, and by funny money floating around the world with utter contempt for the people of the whole planet. And there are people in our party who at that time said, and I quote, they were intensely relaxed about the filthy rich. I'm not. I don't think any of you are. I get very alarmed when we hear that kind of comment. The initial response of the government was the only one they could do. That was to bring the banks into public ownership, to try and ensure that the economy survived, and to also increase benefits and pensions as a way of putting money into the economy, because there's a fairly little known secret that if poor people have got money, they spend it. If rich people have got money, they put it in a tax haven. And so it's quite important to actually put money into the hands of the poorest people if you want a vibrant and effective economy. And so we went through to the 2010 election. The problem with that election was not some of the things that the Labour government had achieved, Sure Start, children's centres, equality legislation, human rights legislation. A lot of that was very good. There were two big elephants in the room. The first elephant was the deception, deceit and lies which led us into the war in Iraq and caused so much anger all around the country and so much loss of support for our party. And the second was that even in the 2010 election, we were still promising that we would be making cuts even greater than those made by Margaret Thatcher, because we'd accepted this economic orthodoxy that you couldn't run any kind of budget deficit, you had to move into surplus, you couldn't borrow. Well, I'm not in favour of borrowing as a habit. What I am saying is that the role of a government, the role of Parliament, isn't just a bookkeeping exercise, it's also about the life chances, lifestyle and opportunities of every person in the whole country. And not surprisingly, we lost the 2010 election. We've now had 5 years of Lib Dem Tory austerity, and we can see the consequences of that. You can see that in the frozen wages, the lower incomes, the 0 hours contracts, the insecurity of jobs, young people massively in debt following university education, unable to get work. You can see all the consequences of that process. And so when we came to the 2015 election, there was some good stuff in the manifesto, no question about that. But the underlying problem was we were still supporting wage freezes in the public sector, we were still going to be cutting local government expenditure, we were still going to be making cuts in central government spending because we'd wedded ourselves to this arbitrary date to move into budget surplus. By the way, this arbitrary date keeps arbitrarily moving a little bit further away. It's a bit like chasing the crock of gold at the end of a rainbow. Every time you think you've got there, the rainbow's moved on a bit. And when you get to where it should be, the rainbow's gone altogether. And crock of gold there is not. So we didn't win in May. And so we've got to have a very fundamental think about where we go from here. Do we, as a party and a Labour movement, say, well, there's a Tory government in power, there's a Tory government in office, by the way, on the magnificent total of 24% of the electorate supporting them. Do we then accept everything they say and put up with it and hope that in 5 years' time people will be so fed up with the Tories that maybe they'll vote for something else? Well, I think we've got to be a bit more honest with people and a bit more fundamental about it. I think we have to say that we want a different economic strategy. And we put forward a very serious, quite lengthy economic strategy document, which is about investing in people, is about investing in manufacturing industry, is about investing in high technology jobs, is about providing real chances and real opportunities for young people. As many of you will know, I have said and continue to say that I think the holding of nuclear weapons is immoral. I do not support the nuclear disarmament, nuclear arms programme at all. I'm one that's in favour of nuclear disarmament and therefore would oppose the replacement of Trident in 2016. But, and there's a very important point to make here. I also recognise a large number of people are working on that programme, very, very skilled people, making something which I'd rather they weren't making, but nevertheless they're very skilled people. And they are not the problem. The problems are the politicians and the military thinkers that have brought this thing about. So I am strongly saying, ring fence that £100 billion that would have been spent on Trident to invest in high technology manufacturing industry jobs, to invest in an arms conversion agency and a national investment bank, so that we don't lose the skills, the brilliant skills of those people. Instead, they're making something that is less dangerous to the world and more socially useful. It is a complicated process to go through. I don't underestimate that. But I think it's a process we have to go through, and that is why we're putting it forward as a serious proposal for serious discussion, both before September the 12th and whatever happens on September the 12th, a process after that. Because I grew up in the Midlands, in Shropshire, and I come from a family of engineers and a family of people that have always wanted to develop and make things. And I am fed up with the way in which this country has been allowed to develop into essentially a financial services economy rather than a manufacturing economy, and the loss of opportunities for so many young people. We're very good at inventing things in this country. We're very bad at developing those inventions and taking them forward into development of useful products. Going back a long way. I was a research officer in the engineering union in the early 1970s when Tony Benn was industry secretary. British Leyden collapsed. British Leyden was then taken into public ownership. And Tony came to us and said in the engineering union, give us your ideas, give us your ambitions, give us your hopes and show us what could be done. And we organised shop stewards meetings, workers meetings all over the country, including here and at the Digbeth in Birmingham. All that skill and talent that had been suppressed and oppressed by layer upon layer of management in the private sector was ready to be released with all those ideas of how we could develop the products and use the skills of people. All those ideas, ambitions and skills are there 40 years later. Let's unleash them. Let's unlock that talent. Let's give people real hope. And the other side of it, of course, is the kind of society we want to live in. The Tory government, I like to think they've got 4 horsemen of the apocalypse about them. But so far only 3 have got out of the stable. And the 3 are the budget, the so-called Welfare Reform Act, it's great the way Tories abuse language, and the Trade Union Reform Bill. Yeah, another abuse of language. What's this budget about? It's about attacking young people. It's about taking away the life chances of young people from poorer families who want to go to university with a grant to be able to pay their fees. It's about taking benefits away from the 3rd child onwards in any larger family. It's about, under the Welfare Act, or Bill rather, taking away the necessary benefits that the poorest people in this country rely on. It's not about challenging the waste of expenditure by a combination of subsidising low wages through in-work benefits and subsidising high rents in the private rented sector through the housing benefit system. Surely we deal with the housing crisis by investing in council housing, by controlling the private rented sector and giving people an opportunity to get somewhere decent to live. Now, if I ask you all to put your hands up and say, do you support a national health service free at the point of use as a human right for everybody, first hand, second hand, third hand, 200 hand, 300, it's all there. I'm sure everybody intended to put their hands up. There's no problem about that. We accept that. Think how that thing came about. Those people who, in the 19th century, were decried as obsolete, obscure fantasists and dreamers. How could you possibly give everybody free access to a doctor and a hospital? What a ludicrous idea. Imagine the way they were treated. And all those people that in the Great Depression of the 1930s said, we didn't have to live in a society based on the means test and desperate poverty. We didn't have to live in a society where the Jarrow Hunger Marchers had to march to London in order to try and get some recognition of their plight. That generation won us the National Health Service. But that generation also won us the principle of the welfare state. The idea that as a society we would not pass by on the other side while a fellow human being was facing destitution, homelessness, poverty, and spending the night on the streets. Sadly, somewhere along the line, we've allowed ourselves to be deterred from that direction and have gone down the debate about Benefit Street, gone down the debate of abuse of people who receive disability benefits, passed by on the other side while those people who've been passed as able to work under the availability for work test, facing mental health problems, have even taken their own lives as a result of it. The sheer brutality of the way that the Tories are running this benefit system is beyond disgusting. We have to be strong enough, proud enough and honest enough to say that we want to live in a society where nobody is destitute, where no child goes hungry, where nobody has to sleep on the streets. Isn't there something deeply wrong about a wealthy country like ours indulging itself in an orgy of criticism of those people who are victims of often a very, very brutal system? And so this campaign is about a different economic policy, an economic policy that works for all, forward-looking, enhancing and using and developing the skills of everybody. But it's also about the kind of society we want to live in, where we don't allow people to lead a life of poverty and desperation. And so we're suggesting the minimum wage can be the TUC figure of £10, eminently affordable and actually saves money to some extent through the benefit system. But we're also looking at the question of young people and the debts that they face. We had a big rally in Preston yesterday morning. Great. There were so many people came, we had to move it to a pub garden. And the rain kept off for the 1 hour of the rally, so all was well. And I met a young man there who had just completed his degree, got a good degree, and just graduated. Great. Congratulations to him, congratulations to all those young people and others that have graduated. And then I said, what's for you now? And he said, £52,000 worth of debt. That's what he's faced with, because he worked hard at school, got his A-levels, got to university, got a degree, and is now faced with a massive debt. I voted against the introduction of fees in the first place for £1,000 because I could see the direction in which it was going. I voted against them when they went to £3,000 because the direction had already gone. I voted against them when they were £9,000, and I now see the next thing down the road is lifting the cap on student fees so that Oxbridge can charge whatever it can get away with, and every other university will be boxing and coxing around the place to see what fee level they can get away with. In the meantime, we're loading generation after generation with enormous debt. Now, I think education is very important. I think education is very important for the individual who's being educated. Gives them life chances, gives them opportunities, gives them understanding. I also think education is important for all of us. I want to travel on a train that's safe. If there's a good engineer maintaining that train, it's probably safe. I want to travel on a plane that's safe. I want to know the doctor that's treating me is fully qualified and well educated. I want to know the teacher that's teaching my kids. I want to know that the surveyor that's looking at the buildings. I want to know all of these things are good. We all benefit from a qualified, educated society. How much would it cost to actually get rid of student fees? By the calculations that I've been given, and I believe them, instead of cutting corporation tax from 20% to 18% in this ridiculous race to the bottom between one country after the other across Europe, while the profits of the multinationals climb and climb, we could put it up to 20.5%, and that would cover the cost of university fees for every student. Is that a price worth paying or not? There's lots more I could say, and I don't want to go on too long. I just want to say two other words about the kind of society we're in. We have done good work on human rights legislation, good work on equalities legislation, and good work on outlawing discrimination within our society. Things have changed a great deal during my lifetime, and I've been proud to be part of that, and some of those things we've achieved in Parliament. But we still live in a society where black youngsters have less chances than their counterparts. Well, there's a disproportionate number of black youngsters in the criminal justice system and underachieving in school. Where there is a gross income level inequality in our society, where the richest 5 families own the equivalent of the wealth of a fifth of the entire population. There is still a gender pay gap where women overall earn 21% less than men. And the only monitoring of gender pay that's done is in companies employing more than 250 people. And these days, many companies are actually much smaller than that, and therefore they're not subject to it. And there is a disturbing rise of the far right in Britain today, and there is a blame culture that goes on against minorities. I look upon the crisis that's happening now in Calais as a humanitarian crisis. Let's look at the desperation of those people. And all the governments of Europe, instead of blaming each other and working out military solutions to the problem, should instead be looking at ways you can look at where the refugees come from in the first place, the victims of war that they are all across the region, the desperate journeys they're making, and the numbers that die along the way. There are more displaced people on this planet now than at any time in recorded history, even more than at the end of the Second World War. Military solutions don't bring long-term peace. What we need is a humanitarian, intelligent, sensible, decent approach, and recognise every human life is valuable. Every child deserves to be able to have a childhood and an education. It's not simple, it's not easy, but we don't need the kind of abusive language that's been used over the past few days towards these people. Let's be human beings and have a humanitarian, decent approach to the plight of fellow human beings. And I conclude with this point. Our campaign is about, yes, the leadership of the party. It is about the direction in which this party goes, and none of it is simple. We face huge challenges in the world, in the environment in which we live, the jobs we need to create, the kind of society we want to live in. So we do need to have an approach to the world that I think is not based on going to war on behalf of the USA whenever they require it. It's an approach that's based on our own foreign policy and our own independence, and the ideas of a cohesive society in which everybody can achieve something. Those people that founded our party had great vision. Many people that have worked so hard for so long in unions and community groups and campaigns have achieved fantastic amounts. Political change, in my experience, doesn't come around because groups of members of Parliament sit around a table in the august setting of the members' tea room of the House of Commons and think, Goodness, we must solve this problem of inequality. Goodness, we must deal with the poverty of the people in this country. It tends often, these discussions, to develop into political games, who can do down who can be abusive to somebody else, and who can gain today's advantage for tomorrow's defeat of somebody else. Well, I have seen all of that, and I've observed plenty of that over the time. And the papers are full of, well, frankly, full of psychiatrists discussing what our campaign is thinking about. I have to say, I was totally unaware of some of the thoughts we're apparently having. I was completely unaware of all of it. So I'm reading the Sunday papers with great interest, because it saves us having to do any thinking, because there's a lot of very clever people out there doing all the thinking for us. But I just say this. Politics and our lives are very serious and very important. The adult social care crisis, the mental health crisis, privatisation of the NHS, academies and free schools that ought to be part of an LEA, all serious, very important issues. We haven't got time, interest, inclination or energy to involve ourselves in personal abuse of anybody. I don't care what people say, because I ain't saying anything in return. We are sticking to the issues and the policies and the hopes and aspirations of ordinary people. And this has been a summer that's brought a lot of people together, sharing those ideas. Whatever happens on September the 12th, and no predictions are going to be made by anybody in this, whatever happens then, keep together. Keep our strength together. Keep our views together, so that we can ensure that we have a movement in this country that is, yes, a political party, yes, is a labour movement, but is also a social movement that can unite an awful lot of people, some of whom not in unions or political parties, but nevertheless have interesting, important and valid views of the kind of decent and civilised world that they want to live in. You ain't going to achieve a decent, civilised world by giving tax breaks to the super rich, taking benefits away from the poor, destroying the housing opportunities of many, and saddling a whole generation of young people with debt. You can do things differently if you share out the cake in the bakery a bit more fairly than it is at the present time. That's our hope, that's our aspiration, that's what we're achieving. Thank you very much for inviting me today.
Questions from you now. We've got Jeremy till 3:30, so I'm going to take questions in groups of 3. So if people want to indicate they've got a question, loud, this way, loud, I will get to you as soon as I can. So, got lady at the back there.
Well, and points of view as well.
Colleague here, and gentleman there in the blue shirt. Okay, at the back. You next. Yeah. No, first. Yeah.
Just like to ask 2 points on investment that he's talking about. One is about PFI, because we're saddled with tens of millions of pounds interest payments on our hospital here because it's PFI. And secondly, to say a bit more about the National Investment Bank, is it going to have a green focus, or is it going to be moving us towards the circular economy?
Just say your name before you ask a question as well.
Chris Taggart, a general practitioner in Tile Hill. As a general practitioner, I'm witnessing the meltdown of the NHS. What plans does Jeremy have to turn it around should he ever become Prime Minister?
The gentleman over there in the blue shirt.
Yeah, just one point.
No, sorry, just here, sorry. No. That blue shirt.
Wrong shade of blue, mate.
Sorry.
Thank you very much, Frank. My question is, first can I say thank you to Jeremy, because you only supported our campaign to some degree. And most people will not be aware of it. It is against Indians, within Indian society, the caste discrimination. We are campaigning to finish that off. And during the Equality Act, when it was being, a reform of the bill, when it was being composed, we lobbied Harriet Harman. She did put that thing in Equality Act to some degree, but a little bit was left over, and we are struggling. It's gone to the sharks. I would like to see our next leader that will you make sure that the Equality Act is amended with the caste discrimination completely eliminated under the law. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Sorry. Thanks, Jane, for your question on PFI and National Investment Bank. I'm not quite sure what you mean by a circular economy, but let's discuss that later. I think I know what you mean, but I'll answer your point on PFI. When PFI was first dreamt up as an alternative for Labour before the 1997 election, the BBC called me up and said, what do you think about private finance initiative for funding public services? And I said, I can't see it as a solution. I see it as a big problem, a big debt, and we lose control of our public services as a result. And the BBC report said, that sounds interesting. Will you do an interview about that? So I said, okay. So he came round and we did the interview. And I then got the most unbelievable levels of abuse from the party leadership and party colleagues saying, you don't know what you're talking about, it's the only way forward, we can never raise taxation to do anything, we can only do it by this means. And I said, well, sorry, you're totally wrong. One is you can borrow through Public Works Loans Board, which gives you secure long-term funding. It doesn't lose you control of the services. And secondly, PFI will be a millstone around the necks of any school or hospital or housing project that's built through by PFI. And yes, you do get your new hospital, you do get your new school, you do get your new building, but it comes at a very, very high price indeed. And I oppose PFI, continue to oppose PFI, and I'm looking towards the idea of a national investment bank, hopefully that could take over a lot of the PFI, and so that we don't end up with this dreadful bill that many hospitals are facing. And remember, private finance initiative payments are the first call on any school or hospital or anything else, and it often leads completely to the loss of ownership of the building, often the in-house maintenance facilities, the hotel facilities in hospitals and all other things. I think it is an appalling idea. A great deal of money has been made by a lot of people, a lot of companies out of PFI, and we are all paying the price for it. It's simply not a very sensible way of funding things. I do believe as a country we should borrow to invest. That's why I'm suggesting a national investment bank. We should borrow to invest in rail infrastructure, in housing infrastructure, in health and education infrastructure, but not, PFI is a bit like trying to buy a house on a credit card. And we're all paying the price for it. So I have a quite strong view on that subject. The point that Chris made about the NHS, well, that the Health and Social Care Bill envisages, and indeed is now operating, that the NHS should operate on a 51-49% share of public to private. They're hollowing out the NHS whilst keeping the badge. They are working GPs and doctors harder than ever, and then the idea of a 7-day NHS seems to be accompanied by routine abuse of any medical practitioner at any level within the NHS. I recall the same levels of abuse being thrown at teachers a few years ago. Sorry, let's have respect for people that have worked very hard to qualify as doctors, nurses, anaesthetists and all the other crucial grades in hospitals and GP services, and treat them with respect. If there's to be 7-day working, and I'm not necessarily against greater access to the NHS over weekends, fund it properly. Don't force people into working 7 days any more than you would in any other profession. But above all, ensure our NHS is properly funded. We have an internal market in the NHS which is very expensive to administer, very profitable for those companies that come in, very damaging to the chances and good care treatment of an awful lot of patients. Why can't we just be proud of the idea of a national health service, not just free at the point of use, but also without an internal market, and instead a management structure designed to meet patients' needs rather than the profitability of Virgin Healthcare or somebody else. And so, can I say, on behalf of many of us, thank you for what you do, and thank you to all those GPs that do genuinely speak up for and understand the interconnection between poverty and ill health, bad housing and underachievement in schools, and ill health that goes with it. Frank Dobson, when he was Health Secretary, started on the right road of publishing the report that was suppressed by Margaret Thatcher, Professor Black's report, on the link between poverty and ill health. That should be the basis on which our NHS operates, not making it into a cash cow for the private sector to suck the lifeblood out of it. I want an NHS that's the NHS of universal provision, first port of call for all of us, not a health service that's a health service of last resort for those that can't afford private medicine. Be proud of the principle. The last point that was raised, thank you very much for raising it. I'm a member of the Human Rights Committee in Parliament, and I'm also chair of a committee on Dalit discrimination. This is discrimination by caste and descent, which is a major problem, particularly in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Nepal, but it is also an issue in Britain. And when the Equalities Bill was going through Parliament towards the end of the 2005 to 10 Parliament, a number of us put forward an amendment to outlaw discrimination by caste and descent. John McDonnell MP, a good friend of mine, put forward a very clever amendment which required whoever the government was after the election to undertake research into this issue, which was done. And the amendment said if research showed there was systemic discrimination by caste and descent in Britain, then it should be put on the face of the Equalities Bill, or Equalities Act, as a regulation. The research showed there was discrimination. The requirement on the government was to introduce the regulation. They drew up a draft regulation, refused to put it before the House for voting upon, and set it out for 5 years of consultation. 5 years of consultation when it should have been something like a month, and it still hasn't been implemented. As far as I'm concerned, any kind of discrimination is wrong. That's why we passed the Equalities Act, that's why we have the Human Rights Act, and I'm very determined that whenever we get that opportunity in Parliament, we will include that regulation in the Equalities Act so that that level of discrimination is wrong. Discrimination is a waste for all of us, so let's stand up for an end to all discrimination in any form within our society, because it actually unleashes a lot of potential from which we all benefit. Thank you very much for your question.
Brother at the back there by the window, Chris at the back with the glasses, and then one over here. Then I've got some behind me as well I'm going to take in the next round. So 1, 2, 3, then I'll take some more, don't worry, so we can get through them. Over there.
Gentlemen, I'm really thankful for this opportunity. And like you, I would like to live in a world where not 80 individuals that can put in the double decker whose wealth is equal to 3.2 billion on planet Earth. So my question is, why sometimes we look at giving or paying taxes as a dirty word and not as a badge of privilege, that as a human being, you are doing it for the benefit of humanity in large and the society. After all, if you look at our Nordic neighbors, they are willing to pay up to 60%. And some of their CEOs of companies are not complaining that 60% is making me live a miserable life. So that's my first question. And second quick question, and there is a lot of this Islamophobia going on in the UK. And I don't want Tory party to teach me about my faith. I don't want Tory party.
I'm going to take 4 questions at a time now. I haven't got the people at the back, so I've got the brother here at the back wants to raise a question as well. So just say your name.
Thank you very much, Master of Ceremony. Thank you, Jeremy. My name is Farirai Bongui Matzikanda. My question is, it relates to what the people here are for. They want their vote. They want Jeremy to be the leader. Do we have any strategic mechanism which has been put in place with your management that we are going to secure the vote. Because I come from a country where rigging is massive.
Okay, so I'm going to take the questions in 4. So we've got 4 there. I've got some more. I've got people who've already submitted their names, so I'm going to try and mix them in as well in the next session. So.
Thanks. It's a shame everybody hasn't got a microphone, actually, because we'd be better able to hear each other, but there we are. On the point raised, the first question was about levels of taxation and the fact that Nordic countries have much higher levels of both income tax and higher levels of taxation at the top end and very good quality of public service as a result of it. Yeah, sure, there's debate in Denmark and Norway and Sweden about levels of taxation, but the levels of public service provision, the efficiency of their criminal justice system, the low levels of reoffending, and the good quality of prisons and all those kind of issues seem to me something that we can learn a great deal from. And as I look at it this way, nobody really wants to pay tax, I fully understand that, but actually it's what has to be paid in order to get the kind of society that we want. It can also be a major factor in redistribution. But the strategy of the past few years seems to have been to reduce the number of tax collectors and inspectors through HMRC. A lot of jobs have been lost. And at the same time, develop quite a lot of rhetoric about tax avoidance and then actually not do a great deal about it. Richard Murphy, who is a renowned expert on these issues, has calculated that at least £50 billion a year of tax is avoided by the biggest corporations and big business in Britain. And Margaret Hodge, as chair of the Public Accounts Committee, sort of summed it up quite well when she said, well, if you owe £500 or £1,000 to HMRC, they come after you big time. If you owe 5 or 10 million, they invite you to lunch to have a discussion about it. Well, surely, I don't think it's likely that they're going to invite everybody that owes £500 in tax to have lunch with them, but at the very least, we should be quite serious about employing more people, not less, in HMRC. We should be quite serious about closing down tax loopholes and tax evasion points, and quite tough on the companies. Now, I live in Finsbury Park in North London, and on the street near where I live, there's 2 coffee shops. One is owned by a big multinational with a green sign above it, so you'll guess which one that is. The other one is owned by a friend of mine who has run this quite small cafe for 30 or 40 years. And I said to him, it's really generous of you to pay tax the way you do. And he looked at me and thought, what are you talking about? I have to pay my tax. I said, yeah, shame about the people across the road, because they can register themselves as a company somewhere else, offshore their profits are somewhere else, as have Boots and other companies have done. We all lose as a result of that. So let's close down those tax loopholes and collect the money that's there. The question from Karen on gender equality, a number of issues. One is to, I think we've made a mistake in closing down the various equality commissions and merging them all into one equality commission. I think there should be questions on rights of women, rights of disabled people, ethnic minority discrimination. Those should be often separately looked at, and so that those commissions are properly focused on them. On the question of discrimination of women, I made the point about gender pay. I made the point about being much tougher on the examining of the wage levels that are paid, and much tougher on recruitment practices, what goes on, because there are far too many very well qualified, very able women that are not able to get on because of real glass ceilings that exist in many places and many industries, and there has to be a much tougher approach to that. We've got a long way to go. Discrimination is such a waste. Underpaying people is wrong. preventing women achieving their potential is just as wrong. We have come some distance. Barbara Castle started that out in 1970, but others started it out much earlier. Those that campaigned for the rights of women to vote, those that campaigned for women's representation, and we've come some way. But I'm suggesting that as a Labour Party we should set an example. Half of our shadow cabinet should be women, half of our national executive should be women, half of our parliament should be women. That seems to be the right way to go forward. On the point that was made about Department of Social Security, I agree, because I would want the success or otherwise of a government to be measured not just on the normal economic indices, inflation level, etc., etc. I would want it also to be measured on the reductions of inequality, the reductions of extreme poverty in our society, the opportunities that young people have to get on, the numbers of young people that are unemployed. And so separating out the issues is an important one. But I do come from the human moral perspective that as a society we should care for everybody and everybody should care for everybody else. I know it sounds, some of the papers say that this is all desperately old-fashioned stuff. I think it's not. I think it's civilization in the 21st century. And our friend here, thank you. Yes, this is an election. Yes, everyone can vote in it if they genuinely register as supporters of the party or become members of the Labour Party. There are about 250,000 members of the party. It's gone up a lot since the general election. There are a large number that have registered as supporters who can take part in the election. Personally, I would hope those supporters will convert their support into membership of the party so that we can have this serious policy debate, because electing one person as the leader of the party on September the 12th doesn't change all the policies. What it does is changes some of the personnel, but there's a long road to go down. This is the first time that the major positions in the party have been elected on a very wide franchise, with the role of the parliamentary party solely being the nominators and the gatekeepers of having the election in the first place. This is real democratic expression of the hopes of ordinary people. I hope those people that sit around editorial tables of all our major newspapers and our major broadcasting corporations understand that there's a little bit of a wind of change blowing out there all over the whole country, and it's a very, very healthy summer wind that's blowing.
We had 4 questions submitted earlier, so I'm going to take 2 of those and 2 from the audience. So I'll take this lady here from the audience and this gentleman here who I picked in the blue shirt the first time round. It wasn't his blue shirt.
It was the wrong shade of blue.
It was the wrong shade of blue. And then can I have, after those 2, can I have John Swift and Peter Casey? Can you indicate where they are? Peter's there, John's at the back. So, lady here at the front.
Yes, I'm Helen Lord, I'm from Warwick. I'm retired, but I'm a Citizens Advice Generalist Advisor, and I'm very concerned about the demonisation of the least advantaged people in our society. And unfortunately, this seems to be readily accepted by most of the newspapers that ordinary people read. And I just think they're going to crucify you. And I'm just wondering how you're going to deal with the papers, you know the ones I'm talking about.
I'm Spartacus.
How are you going to deal with the familiar papers that we all know about? First of all, about the demonisation of people who have had nothing to do with the economic crisis and have very, very good cause for claiming what they claim. And I'd just like to know how you're going to deal with it on a personal basis and for those people.
Thank you, Helen.
Richard.
My name is In 2014, Bank of England released a report called Money Creation in the Modern Economy. In this report, they stated, whenever a bank makes a loan, it simultaneously creates a matching deposit in the borrower's bank account, thereby creating new money. effectively we have a privatised money system. So what are your views on monetary reform?
Okay. John Swift. John?
Welcome, Jeremy, Coventry. My question is related to the state of the party. My membership card tells me Labour Party is a democratic socialist party. And what that means, briefly, is transfer of wealth and power from the minority to the majority. Which I understand means from the ruling class to the working class. And my experience here in the Labour Party is that the party is neither democratic nor socialist. The party has abandoned its socialist perspective, and it has also forgotten that it was founded to give a voice to organised labour in Parliament. My question is, should you become a member of the Labour Party, which we all want here, what and how are you going to address those problems?
Thank you.
Peter Casey, Sherborne Ward and Coventry for Corbyn. How might you hope to reconcile and unify a hostile, business-friendly parliamentary party that seeks to undermine you at every turn, while continuing to aspire and encourage an active and determined anti-austerity support base?
That's it, then. Do you want to take some more? You've got 4 there. Do you want to take some more? I'll take 2 more then.
All right, we'll take 2 more. So we've got... Do you want to read yours as well? Got gentleman up here, and then this lady here. So, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Matt. 3 things really quickly. Jeremy Corbyn, you have given me hope, is the first one. The second one is I'm a second-year physics undergraduate at the University of Warwick, doing an integrated master's, who will graduate with £66,000 worth of debt. To anyone that thinks... I'm currently doing a research placement in the department for my summer. To anyone who thinks that grants aren't necessary, I'm very lucky, if I didn't get £150 per term from my university, I would be unable to do anything that costs money and would only be buying value food. And sorry it was wrong, but the question is the media have seized upon this number of if global average mean surface temperatures rise by 2 degrees, that's going to be a cataclysm. That number came from a 1970s economist. It has no scientific meaning. The current reports show that it is likely that by 2100 we will see a 4-degree rise, if not a 6-degree rise. A 4-degree rise corresponds to 40% of the Earth's landmass being in permanent drought and half of all species gone extinct. This is going to happen. It is a cataclysm. There is nothing being done on the scale of what must be done if humanity is to have a hope. Is since there is almost no public mandate for action, and the action has to be huge, what sort of reform and restructuring will you be considering?
We'll take 2 more. We'll take this lady here and then the colleague with the check shirt.
Hi, Chairman. My name's Patmore Quinwood. I'm a member...
You better stand up so everyone
Pat,
can hear you.
Difficult with the dog.
I'll tell you what, use
Sorry,
the...
if I stand up, my dog stands up.
come round here. Don't strangle him.
Are you okay then?
Sorry, people. Right, my name's Patmore Quinwood. I'm a member of the RNIB and Guide Dogs. I would like to ask Jeremy, when he gets voted in, and I do believe it is when, is he going to support the RNIB and Guide Dogs, along with his disability thing that we all agree, for people like myself, who's a guide dog owner, to be able to go out safely? The biggest problem in Coventry, and I know we have some councillors here, so I'm hoping they're picking it up as well, is I want the government to make local councils I want the government to make the local councils to ban street parking. If it's not,
Pavement parking, parking in front. I've now had the councillors now very nicely put me 2 big long yellow lines in front of my house. So I can't get a disabled parking space, but people still park there because they haven't put the yellow lines back yet, because we've had all this nice road put down, which is covered in shale, which is no good for my dog. And also parking on pavements, as you know, sorry about that, also damages pavements. I have had several falls, I've damaged my eye socket and done lots of broken bones, and my dog has also been injured. In fact, somebody said, "What are you laying in the road for?" But secondly, it's all the same thing, sorry Jeremy, A-boards and street furniture, people on bikes, big no-go. And again, for blind and partially sighted people, we've got dogs, yeah, we're very brave, but please can we have no more safe and shared spaces? No shared spaces, please. I don't need to have shared spaces, it's every man for himself. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sam Hargrave, I'm a councillor over in Nuneaton. I didn't bring my passport. In Nuneaton, we used to weigh our Labour votes, and under Blair, we lost, more than 10,000 votes. So to my former PPC, who supported Liz Kendall, and others in Nuneaton who say you've got no hope of winning Nuneaton back, for me in a marginal council seat, and for other councillors here, what are you going to do to win places like Nuneaton, and can you? I mean, I believe you can, but what do you feel?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much for the questions. I'll go through them. First of all, Helen, your question about the CAB and demonisation, you're right, because we have had systemic cuts for the past 5 years now in citizen advice bureaus, law centres, any kind of voluntary advice thing. And every time those are cut, people who desperately need help and support don't get it. The DWP saves money and people go hungry as a result of it. And this is then accompanied by a litany of stories in a lot of papers, the Metro, the Evening Standard, the Daily Mail, the Sun, and so on, always on about benefit scroungers. Now, nobody in this room is in favour of anybody claiming something they're not legally entitled to. Nobody's in favour of anybody defrauding the system or anybody else. But I just say to you that the levels of abuse that are heaped against people, particularly those with disabilities and mental health conditions, is quite unacceptable in a society. Can't we be a little bit more human about how we approach these things? And you kindly asked after the unfortunate comments that are sometimes made in my direction. It's life. I don't care. I honestly do not care what people think about me or anybody else as an individual. I'm not terribly interested. I'm much more interested in the policies and the politics that go with it. And since our campaign, and I stress it's our campaign, it's not me, it's thousands of people that are working together on this, absolutely refuse to engage in that level of debate. It forces others to reckon with the policies that we're putting forward. There's nothing the popular press would like more than us to get involved in abusing X, being rude about Y, making jokes about Z, and all the rest of it, because it would be a wonderful distraction from the fundamental issue that we want our party to represent an economic direction, a social direction, and a human direction that is very different. By refusing to engage on that low level of debate, we have actually, I believe, encouraged and achieved a much higher level of debate and a higher level of understanding within our society. And don't run away with the idea that the printed media run everything. Could I just do a show of hands? How many people here buy a newspaper every day? It's about a fifth of the audience or less. How many buy one once a week? It's the same people. How many people never buy a newspaper? Yeah, that's it, you see, that's the point. and presumably you pick up your news either from television, radio, or online. There are lots of alternative sources of picking things up, and we should use and not be afraid to use social media. It's a way of getting huge numbers of people involved and a huge message around. But we also have to support the NUJ in its campaign to prevent the concentration of media ownership. And whilst I'm sure every one of us here occasionally is shouting at the television when the BBC is showing the news, I certainly have, I'm sure all of you have, I defend the BBC as a public service broadcasting organisation, and I think we all should. And the BBC has to be popular as well as informative, and it has to be entertaining, and it's got to be something for the entire population. Otherwise, it will end up as a subscription service or a commercial service, and we'll end up with something like Fox News in the USA running the basis of our media in this country. Look at PBS America, the way that's been allowed to decline and be destroyed. The point on the Bank of England and money supply, well, the Bank of England was independentised, if that's not a tortuous use or misuse of English, by Blair in 1997. I thought that was completely wrong. The central control of money supply, banking, ought to be in democratic public hands. It should be publicly owned and publicly run as the Bank of England. That should not be run independently, any more than the European Central Bank should be independent of all government as it is and run by bankers for the benefit of bankers, as the people of Greece are now finding out to their horror what is actually happening there. The point about transfer of power and the weakness of the Labour Party, the point that John made, well, Tony Benn used to talk and agonise about these things a great deal, and I remember once I asked Tony about this, about socialists and the Labour Party, and he said, well, Jeremy, the Labour Party is a political party that contains many socialists, just as the Church of England is a church that contains many Christians. But it doesn't necessarily make it a socialist party. The Labour Party has always been quite a broad church, and I don't think that's going to necessarily change very quickly. But I do say this, if there's no God-given right for any political party to exist. They exist because there are volunteers, they exist because there are people who support it, they exist because there are people who see their hopes and their ideas embodied generally in that party. If we go through the next 5 years arguing that austerity is somehow or other necessary and good for us, like the poorest are the guilty ones that brought about the crash of Lehman Brothers and the banking system in 2008, what inspiration is there in that to anybody? If instead we're actually articulating as a party the hopes of a lot more people, then as a party we'll be stronger. Now, we also have to say to those people who don't consider themselves to be poor or vulnerable or anything else that one day you're going to need the NHS. One day you're going to need mental health services. One day you're going to have an elderly relative that needs adult social care services. One day you're going to need legal aid so you can go to court. One day you might be in need of the collective good of the rest of society. The NHS principle is something one can apply to society as a whole. If we run away from our basic principles as a party, we disappear as a party, and I am very determined that this election process will bring about something very different. Now, you very kindly mentioned, Peter, that the Parliamentary Labour Party are not necessarily at one with this campaign. I get that. I picked that up. I picked that up in the days during the nomination process. And day-to-day sotto voce interactions with some of my colleagues are quite interesting. I should record them all. My message to them is quite simply this. We are in a process by which a very large number, possibly 300,000 people, are taking part in this debate, this big conversation. That voice has got to be heard wherever it matters. Within the Parliamentary Labour Party, within the National Executive, within trade union leaderships, within society as a whole. And from that we go on and campaign. And the point you raised from a friend from Nuneaton. Fair point, very good point. We had the first of the televised hustings in Nuneaton, and I was told this was going to be the worst night of my life. This was going to be terrible. This was where any of your ideas, our ideas, was going to come unstuck. My view is quite simply this. I don't want anybody to vote for UKIP. Absolutely not. I think it's a council of despair. It's a cul-de-sac to nowhere. But if we don't, as a party, offer to deal with the housing crisis by building houses, the health crisis by providing sufficient hospitals and GPs, the school shortage places by building enough schools, not going down this nonsense road of developing academies and free schools, but build schools through the local education authority, then people will reach for the council of despair, will start turning on minorities as though they're the cause of the problem rather than the lack of planning in our society. You can win people back if you bring people together. That is the message that we are putting forward. And I spent a lot of the last election campaign, apart from being in my own constituency, in many others, including Thanet, where Nigel Farage was trying to be the MP. I had some very lengthy and very strange conversations with a very large number of people. But when you have those conversations, and you start saying, well, actually, in any kind of civilized society, we rely on each other. Blaming somebody else who might be marginally worse off than you isn't going to solve the problem. Working with them is going to solve the problem because it gives you that strength of the collective. And I think we can win a lot of people back on that basis. The point our friend raised here about two things. One is your level of debt. Well, you heard my views on that earlier. The other one, well done for raising it, the issues of the environmental crisis facing the whole planet. It's poor working class communities around the world that suffer first with environmental disasters, that suffer first with pollution. It's the people of the big cities in Britain who suffered first with the appalling levels of pollution of the 19th and much of the 20th century. It is a social and a class issue as well. It is the poorest in India and China that are dying of asphyxiation in urban communities because of unregulation of exhaust emissions, power stations, and everything else. But it's all of us who are affected by all the stuff we're putting up into the atmosphere and the attitude of mind that you can take as much as you like out of the world, you can burn as much as you like, throw it up into the atmosphere, and it doesn't have any effect. Well, it does. And there's something deeply inconvenient and deeply illegal about pollution clouds. Do you know something? When you pump up pollution clouds into the atmosphere and they blow, they don't stop at national frontiers. They have no respect whatsoever for national frontiers. They just go on like they own the world. And they do. So there has to be a global movement. There has to be global agreements on emission levels, and there cannot be exemptions from it. Because if you start putting exemptions from it, you start allowing country A to pollute the sea because it's in its economic interest to develop by polluting the sea, the air, or anything else. We all suffer as a result of it. And you're quite right about your figures on global warming and the consequences of it. And so, as Dennis Skinner once succinctly put in one of his more philosophical movements, when he was discussing the environment with Margaret Thatcher, and she was discussing the hole in the ozone layer, which initially I think she wasn't very keen on discussing. He said, you know something, Prime Minister, you can't solve the hole in the ozone layer with a man, a bike and an enterprise allowance. It has to be done by international action. And that surely is a piece of intelligent philosophy. One of the points that Pat raised, thank you for raising it, Pat, the question of the Disability Discrimination Act and the requirements on local government are very, very important. It's also, I pay tribute here to Disabled Peoples Against the Cuts for the work that it's done, and many, many other organisations that have shown that it is those people with disabilities that have suffered the most, and the levels of discrimination that are still there. Your point about shared spaces and pavement parking and parking in general is a very good one and very well taken. A lot of small businesses just don't think about it. They stick a table outside a cafe, don't think about it. They stick an advertising hoarding outside, don't think about it. Thoughtlessly, people that drive across a pavement to park on a piece of pavement that is allegedly in private ownership think it's okay to do that. They should think for a moment. Somebody with sight problems or total blindness is going to get injured because of that. Somebody in a wheelchair can't get past and has got to go out into the traffic. It's just simple civilization that you protect the pedestrian places for pedestrians, you don't park on them, you don't damage them, and you don't obstruct people around their paths. So I absolutely support the campaign, and I'm really glad that you raised it here today, and I'm sure that of course it's a matter for local authorities to deal with, but it's also a matter of much tougher legislation, and I have supported a private member's bill put forward by an MP from another party on banning all pavement parking anywhere in the country as a way of making pavements safer for people with dogs, guide dogs, and wheelchairs or disabled people. So thanks very much for raising that point with us today. I'm going to have to finish now because I'm going to get dragged away across to Birmingham. Can I say thank you to Unite for giving us the space this afternoon. Thank you to all those unions that have come together and supported this campaign. This is a time of introspection, thought, hope and expectation. It's a very interesting summer, is the summer of 2015, because politics has been turned from an internal discussion about the degrees of austerity to those of us that are dared to think outside the box of a different kind of world, a different kind of attitude to politics, and real hope that brings us all together, makes us strong, and that's how we achieve real change. Thank you very much for inviting me today.